Hello everyone. Today I will say something about the relationship between magic and rationality, or between magic and what could be called scientificity, this obsession with scientific reasoning, scientific proof, giving insights and knowledge the status of being scientific. And this tendency to relegate magic to either earlier phases of development of rationality in history, or to something that is a kind of mumbo-jumbo, unreliable kind of knowledge which may only accidentally prove to be true and useful. One of the most influential modern accounts of magic was that by James Frazer, who calls magic pseudoscience and suggests that scientificity or scientific rationality requires things to actually work in reality, to be practical, to be workable. In other words, Fraser's view is that science must work, and that functionality is the same as truth. And this opens up an array of methodological questions, obviously. They include issues of the workability or functionality of beliefs that cannot be supported by a scientific methodology, including those that we could describe as magical. For example, medicine does offer an explanation for the miraculous recoveries from advanced cancers, without a treatment prescribed by science other than saying that it might be the effect of a placebo. So there's no explanation in medicine for what is considered a miraculous recovery from an advanced metastatic cancer without a medically recognized treatment, other than by suggesting that this is an exceptional case where a placebo or a belief in recovery actually translated into actual recovery. However, using the word placebo is question-begging here, because labeling something that a particular science, in this case medicine, can't explain doesn't offer an insight into either the limitations of the methodology of that science, in this case medicine, or into the way the placebo, under question marks, actually works, because it works. According to Fraser's argument, in such cases placebo would be real science, while medicine would be pseudoscience, because the placebo is something that worked, whereas medicine was ineffective, couldn't help the patient, and would therefore be considered pseudoscience. And this illustrates the paradox of this view of scientificity as opposed to magic, as something that is unsupported and incongruent with science. The problem of scientificity has, of course, been resolved much more successfully by Edmund Gettier, the 1960s philosopher, with his famous argument that knowledge is true, justified belief. True and justified belief, where both the truth or workability or success of a hypothesis when tested in reality and the appropriate procedure whereby one has arrived at that belief, for example scientific or some other epistemically accepted method, are relevant for considering something knowledge. So it's not enough for a proposition to be true to represent knowledge. It must be both true, and it must have been arrived at by a recognized procedure of attaining that belief, and that procedure must qualify as rational. Thus, the belief that something bad will happen if one walks under a ladder or a black cat crosses one's path, even if it turns out to be true, namely if subsequently something bad really happens, would not be considered knowledge, because the procedure of acquisition of that belief was not epistemically acceptable. But let us go back to the issue of workability or functionality in everyday reality. Let's consider the present New Age culture, which focuses on the actual validity of beliefs their ability to produce change in reality, without questioning the methodological foundations of the way in which we have arrived at that belief. Is the New Age culture one of magic? By extension, this involves the question of whether in the New Age culture magic holds greater value than science, or vice versa. If magic works, even in situations where science doesn't work, then how justified is it to simply assume that this is so because science has not yet got around to gathering evidence which would definitely scientifically explain something that at present science can't explain? The argument that science will definitely in the future offer an explanation of what it cannot explain at present, or that it ought to be able to do so in principle, is what Jacques Lacan calls university discourse, or discourse of the university, namely the uncritical assumption that if an authority, an institution or discipline, for example, cannot answer a particular epistemic demand, cannot provide a particular piece of knowledge, this is because that authority has not got around to doing so, has not managed to sufficiently develop along its inherently reliable methodological lines, and that authority, and the assumption that that authority or institution or discipline will most certainly be able to satisfy that epistemic demand in the future, provide us with that knowledge or proof or evidence in the future. Now, one of the valid arguments of the New Age culture is that this very assumption that keeps science above magic is deeply unscientific and uncritical, which it seems to me so obvious that no further argument is needed to support this claim. The distinction between magic and scientificity is crucial for psychotherapy and philosophical therapy. The truth in psychotherapy lies not in the realm of epistemology or finding out the actual facts of a case, but rather in ethics, in the normative surroundings of an event or experience, where the normative nature and meaning of the event or relationship shape the person's ability to adequately emotionally metabolize that experience. Paul Verhaeghe, one of the major contemporary Lacanian psychoanalysts, writes, quote, "Psychiatry and psychology, to which psychic troubles belong as general problems in human life, inevitably have to enter the fields of morals and ethics, and therefore are unscientific by definition. Learning and knowledge belong to science. Truth lurks in the field of ethics." Now, if knowledge and truth are not the same, it appears that the New Age culture seeks the truth and places a lesser emphasis on the knowledge. This, in a sense, is a culture of magic, where what matters is really what actually works in the world, what is helpful. In other words, things appear to conform to a reverse of Fraser's argument. Magic is concerned exclusively with the truth, regardless of the methodological characteristics of science, while science is primarily preoccupied with methodology and procedural validity, although this often causes it to actually miss the truth and be ineffective where magic might be effective. On the psychotherapeutic and by extension philosophical therapeutic level, the New Age culture, and I don't mean that in a derogatory manner at all, was championed by Carl Jung, a physician, a Swiss physician, whose early obsession with science and knowledge had turned into an obsession with the truth, regardless of the boundaries of scientific, quote, knowledge, unquote. In the infamous Red Book, whose publication he forbade and which was published only recently by decision of the trust governing his legacy, Jung explicitly confronts common scientific knowledge with what he calls knowledge of the heart, which can only be attained by mercy of what he calls spirit of the depth, and which offers answers about life that cannot, nor do they need to, stand up to the scrutiny of any scientific method. He thus points to a crucial element in his version of psychoanalytic self-therapy, namely that he had come to make life decisions based on his dreams, as insights into the subconscious realities that his waking mind could not access. This same practice is known historically as a magical one, from relying directly on dreams to producing hallucinogenic states that resemble dreams by the use of various substances. People throughout large swaths of history have sought truths that go beyond the rational. They sought knowledge of the heart, as Jung calls it. Joseph Agassi, a recently deceased contemporary philosopher, defines magic as something that is fundamentally opposed to religion. He says, quote, "Take animal sacrifice. We transfer our sins to the animal and punish them for our sins by slaughtering them. This is magic." Now I find this deeply unpalatable. Neither is it true that we punish animals for our sins when we sacrifice them, for the meaning of sacrifice is to give up something for the good, and in the case of animals it was giving up a source of food to please the god or gods, nor is this magic at all. In fact, the sacrifice of animals was part of religious more than magical rituals. Magic is a focus on the truth, regardless of the dominant paradigm of rationality. That is perhaps the most precise definition of magic. Religion, on the other hand, is the cultivation of a relationship with God with the view of improving one's life. And the differences between religions, apart from the differences of the deities one is faithful to, consist of the different portrayals of the personality of the deity and of the different goals set as self-improvement. At least in the Judeo-Christian religion, sacrifice is a key element of self-development. The very metaphor of Jacob's ladder in the Old Testament, where the ladder reaches all the way to the heaven and one climbs it with the hope of reaching out to God, as a matter of normative living of one's life, reflects this understanding of self-development, of attempts to transcend oneself. So, is magic more relevant in psychotherapy than rational argument? I would say that psychotherapy and philotherapy, as the umbrella for all schools of psychotherapy, is both rational and magical. And that without magic, without the magical elements, both in terms of the revelations, unexpected results, which cannot be rationally explained, and the magical feeling, the sense of magic, the transfer between the client and the therapist, and the counter-transference between the therapist and the client, this sense of a magical experience. Without that, all of the cognitive and rational benefits that psychotherapy and philotherapy in general might provide the client with would be dry and empty and not as comprehensive and long-lasting in its effects as it is with magic as its key component. So it seems to me that we shouldn't talk about magic in a disparaging way, and we shouldn't look at it in an evolutionist manner, trying to compare it with various other cognitive and affective structures in our collective behavior, such as religion. We should look at magic as a complementary way of gaining knowledge about the truth, which may not conform to the usual protocols for considering something rational knowledge, but which nevertheless leads to insights and knowledge that, although not rational, may be existentially far more important than